Okay, so welcome everyone to the June Austin, Texas Power BI Meetup Group. We've got a very special guest tonight. We've got Paul Turley with us, so that's awesome. We just thank you, Paul, for joining us. He's going to be talking about moving from Power BI to Microsoft Fabric and what that means if we have to change anything or not. But I'm really looking forward to the session. So thanks again for joining us. After Paul gets through his session, we will be having our monthly drawings for Enterprise DNA and Radicad. So stick around for those. You have to be still in attendance to actually have a chance to win the subscriptions to those. So stick around and we'll do those drawings. We do 2 for Enterprise DNA and we do 1 for Radicad. And we'll go over the terms and conditions at that point. So just a couple of announcements here at the front. So we have a YouTube site now where we're posting all of our recordings. So this recording will be out there later after we get it posted out there. So all of our recordings for this year have started to be posted to YouTube, and all of our prior recordings prior to 2024, there's a link on our site that has the link to User Group TV. That's where you can find our prior recordings. So just, and we've also got materials posted out to GitHub, and that's where you can find us. So these slides will be posted out to GitHub as well, so people can access them there. Okay, so Paul, again, welcome. So Paul is a director of consulting at 3Cloud. He's a long-standing Microsoft MVP. I'm sure most of the people on the call probably know about Paul. So I won't read everything that you've got here, Paul, but we're just excited to have you. Thanks again for taking the time to attend tonight. And I will turn it over to you to kind of introduce yourself and then and get into the session.
All right.
So welcome.
Well, thank you. Okay, so first question, what is the temperature in Austin right now?
That's a great question. It is hot. It is.
It's 200 now.
It is 90.
So I'll brag a little bit. That
Wow,
is that it's
86.
not hot here.
What's the temperature there?
It's let's see. It's going to be about in the 70s. Let me see. It's 71 degrees here in Battleground, Washington. Nice. Sunny Battleground, Washington, which is nice. I'm about 20 miles north of Portland, Oregon. So I'm just in the southwest corner, just north of Vancouver, Washington, which is where I grew up.
That's awesome.
Anyway, I really appreciate the invitation. We have at 3Cloud, we have just been swamped with customers who are very, very interested in figuring out how to implement Fabric. It's still relatively new. The Fabric platform was released to general availability in November of last year. So it's been about 8 months since Fabric was a real thing, available in GA. A lot of features. Well, there are some very fully baked features. It's a very viable platform, but we're still seeing a lot of features that are in public preview. And I don't think Fabric is a platform that's ever going to be quote unquote done simply because it expands so quickly. I think for a lot of workloads, Fabric is done enough for a lot of mid-sized and enterprise clients, but it is still moving so quickly, and a lot of organizations are just beginning to dip their toes into the pool, as it were. But I spend a lot of my time developing workshops and roadmap demo material around Fabric. I'm still heavily engaged, and I work with our business intelligence and analytics group here at 3Cloud. But I'm in a group of 3 people called Delivery Engineering. And essentially what we do is we support our consultants internally. We have a little over 400 people in our data and AI practice. Most of them are data engineers. A lot of them are data architects. And then about a quarter of that group are focused on Power BI. But the lines are being blurred between Power BI and Fabric these days. So I'm pretty heads down on these things. I'm in the middle of delivering 3 different workshops right now to clients, and I'm going to be completely transparent that the title of this presentation I had pitched to build a presentation around, and as I was looking at my calendar yesterday and realized that I had signed up and committed to present to you all, I will often put together a presentation title knowing that I'm going to challenge myself to commit to putting together a deck and demos and such. And I honestly realized that I had done that just yesterday. So I have some good material. I think we have a lot of good discussion points, but I will readily admit that I do not have a real polished and practiced presentation around this topic. But I will kind of share with you the genesis of how this came to be. Last year, a member of the Fabric and BI product team at Microsoft reached out to me and said, we're going to have our first ever Fabric conference in late in the spring of 2024. It's going to be in Las Vegas, and would like to invite you to present. And so I repurposed a presentation I'd done for the past Data Community Summit about a year and a half earlier, and kind of modernized it with Fabric. And I did this session on using Power BI with a lot of data. And it was such a popular topic. It really got me thinking about how to provide some guidance around the journey from Power BI to Fabric through the lens of the BI developer, through enterprise BI. Folks have been using Power BI for a long time. And so I fairly quickly put together a blog post, and I'll share my screen and just put that blog post here. And like I said, I kind of threw this blog post together. It was a lot of random thoughts about what's changed, what's new, what is Direct Lake all about, how do you architect a solution in Fabric versus just in Power BI. And so you can see that I posted this, and I don't have the stats here in front of me, but in the first 3 days, this blog post got more hits than any post I've ever had since 2009. And I think to date it's been viewed by about 60,000 people. And I don't have the most popular blog on the planet, but it's been a long-standing blog. And I thought, well, that's really remarkable that this title captured that much attention. And I thought, well, this would be a good topic for the next Fabric conference, which is in Stockholm in September. And so I've submitted this topic for that conference. They haven't made selections yet. The deadline is actually just about right now. It's midnight European time. And so I rushed to get that abstract put together, and it was based on this blog post. So anyway, that's the history. That's how this came to be. But so just admitting to you all that I don't have a real polished presentation. I do have a few slides that I've kind of thrown together, but they've been cherry picked from some other places. And I have some demos. I would really rather lead a discussion and ask you all to raise your hands, ask questions, post questions in the chat. Let's make this as interactive as we can. And Fernando, improvise. Exactly. That's the mode that I'm in right now. Let me ask this question. So we have 27 people in the meeting. Excuse me. How many of you are actively using Fabric today? You just go ahead and give me a thumbs up or a quick note in the chat. I'm going to switch to people here so I can get a good count. All right. So far, Jack is using Fabric today. Thanks, Jack. All right. And Lauren, so we do have a couple of people out there, but I'm going to assume that for the most part that you have heard about Fabric, maybe seen some demos, but you're not actively using the platform today. All right, so we'll kind of address this at an introductory level, and then we'll go as deep as we can. And again, I invite you to ask questions and just freely come off mute, even if you want. All right, lots of demos, just testing, not using it regularly, using Databricks. Matt, thanks for that. Only trying to work out the business pitch, okay, and getting ready for the DP600 exam. All right, awesome. DP600 is a great exam. It's quite broad, as Fabric is pretty broad across a lot of different tools and technologies. I will share with you that last week I spent 4 days of the 5 weekdays last week up in Redmond, Washington. They asked me to come up and participate in the group of 15 people involved in scoping the next version of all of the Fabric and Power BI related certification exams. And I'll give you a little bit of insight into the direction that that's heading. I have a slide that kind of calls out some new roles that Microsoft have identified. But there's more good stuff coming. DP600 is not going to change significantly, so I wouldn't wait for the update, which might be hard to say, but let's say 6 months from now. It's a good exam, and the only advice that I would really give around DP600, other than use the practice tests and become familiar with all of the topics. You don't have to know Python deeply. You don't have to know data engineering deeply. There are a few questions that you may not be able to answer. You might get wrong, but most folks who know Power BI inside and out do pretty well on the DP600 exam. Budget your time and be prepared to use the Microsoft Learn that's baked into the exam, but don't spend too much time searching for the answers. I almost ran out of time taking the exam, so budgeting time was probably the biggest challenge for me. So
yeah, that's what we've heard too. Same thing. We've heard people use it, the Microsoft Learn, and they kind of get lost in there, and then they run out of time sometimes. So
yeah,
it's good advice.
Yeah, you bet. Lauren, did you have a question?
Oh, sorry. I just realized my hand is still up from.
That's all right. We actually put it down just a few seconds ago. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, great. Okay. So let's get into it. I'm going to park my blog post up on another screen so I can refer to it, and then I'll present these slides. And again, this is a very, very rough outline. I didn't want to go into presentation mode because I need that screen. So we put that over somewhere else. I have burned through 3 laptops, 3 work laptops in the past 2 years. I tend to blow up laptops. And they just gave me a new one. It has twice as much RAM, twice as much storage space. But I'm 62 years old, and they moved me from a 16-inch monitor to a 14-inch monitor. And so if you see me leaning forward and squinting, that's why. I'm getting used to this new laptop. Okay. So the business intelligence process is pretty well defined. And if I know that I presented to you all a little over a year ago on a similar topic. I believe that I used this slide. I use it in a few of my presentations, so apologies if you've seen this before, but data behaves in a pretty predictable way. And particularly when our goal is to analyze data in summary form directionally. The way that we shape and the way that we curate, cleanse, and transform data there's some pretty well-defined rules around that process. And it looks like this. First of all, we have to have a plan. If you just start without a plan and just kind of pluck data from wherever it is and then try to curate it as you go, that's a very iterative process, but it can run out of steam. And oftentimes through those iterations of, oh, here's some more data, let's go get that, let's pound it into the right shape, match it up with some keys. As you go through that process, oftentimes you're going to find out, well, that's not a very high quality data source. Let's throw that one away. And so you have to throw garbage away as you're figuring out what to keep. And that brings us back to having a plan. And every once in a while, we have to kind of throw away everything we've done and start over again. And then we get data, we transform it, we model it, typically into a star schema or a dimensional model, or some derivative of a star schema. We may have some bridge tables, might have some snowflake, fractal kind of tables, but generally speaking, we want to follow dimensional modeling rules. We use DAX to create calculations in the form of measures typically. Then we visualize, we publish, we share, and then we manage it and make sure it's all secure. And this could resemble the same way that we might go about building a house. We have to start with a blueprint, and then there are stages to this process that are pretty well defined. All right, Power BI really centrally sits on top of a data analytics engine called VertiPaq. And VertiPaq evolved out of SQL Server Analysis Services back in the day when it was more cost effective to put data on disk in a hierarchical fashion that we often refer to as cubes. As a user was navigating through that data, maybe using a pivot table in Excel or using a reporting services report or Performance Point or whatever tool they were using back in the day, that data was pulled off of disk as it was needed. So it had to be organized on disk in a very, very efficient manner. VertiPaq took us into the age of in-memory analytics, where data was dimensionally modeled, is dimensionally modeled. And if you're not talking, if you wouldn't mind muting your microphone, there's a little bit of background noise. But VertiPaq essentially brought all of that data up into memory, and that works really, really well. It's an in-memory cache, can be refreshed frequently. It uses column store compression. There are a number of different encoding algorithms that are used internally, a lot of stuff that designers really don't need to worry about, but understanding the way that the engine works can help us design more efficient models. But the point is that all of this data is placed up into memory. And that works great until you have more data than you have space in memory. We try to make sure that the data compresses efficiently. We can do all of things to optimize the experience, but in the end, memory is the limitation. So with Fabric, they realized that the way that they were organizing that data was based on a proprietary architecture created by Microsoft that the open source community had essentially duplicated, came to the same conclusion that if we can store data in column stores and compress it, and then store it at rest in that format, it could easily be brought into memory. And so they created, and I'll eventually create a slide on this, they created a derivative of VertiPaq called VertiParquet. And that's because it's based on Parquet storage. So Parquet is a well-defined file structure. It was invented by the Apache folks. It was kind of part of the big data story, the Hadoop story. But as Apache evolved forward, eventually into Lakehouse technology, Microsoft decided to embrace the open source Parquet format, and they use that now as the basis for essentially an implementation of VertiPack. But those files are actually stored as Parquet files in folders using the Parquet Delta standard, which is defined by the Apache group. And if I had it handy, I would point to a white paper. Oh, hey, I do have it handy. Cool. Let me bring this up. So this is a paper, and I'm sorry, I'm struggling with my new smaller monitor. So let me bring that down here, and then I can go full screen. So the inventors of the modern lake house, who were actually the founders of Databricks. So again, you know, Apache, they created the Spark engine, and then Databricks was built on top of the Spark engine. But this is all open source. So this 2021 article from Berkeley University talks about the modern lake house. This is a 5-year-old article. These are the founders of Databricks. You can see that, you know, some from UC Berkeley, some from Stanford, you know, all the kind of liberal, you know, IT incubator universities around Silicon Valley. But long story short, it talks about the concepts of, rather than storing data in relational databases, using unstructured storage to bring in raw data, put it into a set of folders in a lakehouse, and then to curate that data through stages into a structured format using this Parquet file um, uh, standard, and then applying what's called a delta storage over the top of those Parquet files. So as you can see, this is a new presentation, and so I'm it's a bit fragmented, and this will eventually kind of become the meat of this presentation. But here's an example of where, sitting on top of the lake house, that we have unstructured and structured storage. The structured storage becomes part of a data lake. Let me find it. Oh, there's another diagram. No, like maybe that wasn't the one I'm looking for. Anyway, long story short, the new structured file format, the new structured data format, is what we call Delta, and it uses Parquet files under the hood. So Microsoft implemented this Delta Parquet storage and put VertiPack over the top of it. So if we look at a conventional Power BI solution, it would typically look like this. So we've got data outside of Power BI. It doesn't matter where it is. We use Power Query to bring it into Power BI. We then transform it. It is stored within that proprietary VertiPack structure, which was created by Microsoft. And then we rinse and repeat based on the earlier slide. If we look at what this looks like in the world of Fabric, now our get data experience is outside of Power BI. We can use similar tools, but you have a whole plethora of new tools now. You could use Jupyter-style notebooks using languages like PySpark or Spark SQL. You could use R, you could use Scala. To programmatically get and transform data. We also have a flavor of Power Query, now called Gen 2 Data Flows, that runs outside of Power BI, but it's the same experience that you're used to in Power BI. I'll demonstrate that to you. And then we can use these different data transformation methods. Notice that my slide just went back. We use these different data transformation methods to land data into a lakehouse where it's stored in that Delta Parquet format. And you notice that I have this blue box here that kind of denotes that there's this zone that exists both in Fabric and in Power BI, and that's where my modeled data is stored. So within my lakehouse, I'm going to build my dimensional structure, and that's going to sit at rest using Delta Parquet. But I create a semantic model on top of that then Power BI can utilize for visualizations. And it's this model that has changed. It's very much the same experience as what we've been doing in Power BI, but it uses a different storage technology. And we'll take a look at that. The rest of the experience is the same. It can be done in Power BI Desktop or through the web interface to define our measures, to create our visuals, and then to publish and manage just like we have before. All right. So I mentioned that in this new world, the folks at Microsoft are now recognizing that there are some new roles. There are people who are going to have different jobs. And if any of you are in the mode of kind of thinking about what the next step of your career might look like, pay attention, because this is going to define the way that certification exams will be shaped in the future. And we hope and we think that a lot of employers are going to recognize these roles as well. So traditionally, there have really been two roles associated with the Microsoft BI ecosystem. And over on the left side, we have the data analyst. So these are the desktop analysts. It's my youngest daughter asking me questions. We have the data analyst, and about 80% of Power BI installations serve the needs of data analysts. These are folks who may not necessarily have an IT background. They don't think in SQL. They're not using data at scale. They're using data to get answers to business questions. And most of these folks are business-facing, business-thinking people. I had a doctor's appointment today, and he was a GI specialist, and he was looking at my chart history, and he said, "Well, tell me about these blah 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 surgeries and whatnot." And I started telling the story, and I said, "Well, and I don't think that's relevant to what we're here for." And he said, "Well, yeah, I know that, but it's data, and I love data." And I just thought, wow, that really says something from a professional, in this case, a doctor, a specialist, who's just saying, I can't help but pay attention to the data. And that really defines, I think, the mindset of the data analyst. People have learned that data is where it's at, and data allows them to do their jobs. It allows them to be functional in solving business problems, being able to get answers to critical questions. But they're not people who love data for the sake of data. They're people who love data for the sake of being able to do business or whatever it is that they do. Then we have the BI developer. And so this is a role of a professional who adheres to a set of rules and best practices. They're typically going to work in IT, or at least in a technical group that supports the business, but they're not necessarily business-focused people. And that was the end of the story until fairly recently. New roles. So we have the data engineer. I work with a lot of data engineers. And, 10, 15, 20 years ago, we may have said DBA and developer being people who write code utilizing data, but they're developers. And then we had DBAs who babysat databases. They created databases, secured them, gave people access to them, and tuned queries and that kind of thing. But they weren't necessarily creating solutions. They were babysitting servers. But the modern data engineer, thinks in medallion layers. They may use notebooks, they may use pipelines, they may use SSIS or ADF or Informatica or DBT or a variety of other tools. But essentially, they're moving data along. Something that became very, very apparent, I think long ago, but was kind of accentuated in my experience last week. Let me paint a picture for you. Microsoft picked 15 people from all over the world to come and craft 4 exams, 2 existing exams, 2 new exams, all around Fabric. Every one of us in this group of 15 were very accustomed to being the person with the answer, to being the expert who everybody listened to. As a consultant, I'm kind of accustomed to sitting in front of a client and we talk about their business cases and use cases and problems and such. And then I'll say, and here is the answer. This is what we recommend. And then we, paint an architecture and we hope that for the most part, the client goes, yeah, let's do that. So we had 15 of those kinds of people all sitting in the same room talking about recommended best practices for Fabric. We had some very, very heated discussions, some very, very strong disagreements and debates, and it's a miracle that there wasn't bloodshed. But at the end of the day, we all decided to go to dinner and not talk about Fabric. But so anyway, back to the data engineer. So what's left? What's new now in this new world? And that is a brand new role that we're going to call the analytics engineer. So you think about the data analyst over here. This person is fairly self-taught, may have read some books, may have taken a class, but for the most part, they've learned to use Tableau, Click, Power BI to import some data from spreadsheets, CSV files, maybe a database that they have access to, bring it into a reporting tool of some kind and get results. End of story. But as their needs have grown, and as the volume of data has increased, as data is becoming more and more available, and we have the introduction of streaming data sets, we've got, data lakes that are just, piles and piles, terabytes, petabytes of data. There is a need for business class people to be able to perform analytics at scale. And as that body of people have grown, it's necessary to both establish a platform that's easy to use, to be able to work with data at scale, applying some basic best practices, but with the goal of getting to analytics as quickly as possible. That's where we're headed, and that's largely what Fabric was created for. I'm going to pause there and ask if you have questions or some feedback. And I'm going to ask that you ask questions as well. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I'm just checking the chat. I haven't seen any in the chat, but if anybody is on, if you want to come off mute, if you have questions, or feel free to post. Okay, Andrew's got a question. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Hey, thanks. Do you need to use DBT medallion architecture or SSIS to be a modern data engineer, or is PowerShell, Python, and SQL enough?
That's a good question, and I don't have a definitive answer. Lakehouse architecture is popular for a variety of reasons. I don't think it's an absolute. Relational databases still exist for a reason.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was in a Microsoft-led session today. It was about the kind of where the data transformation product teams were headed in Fabric, new features we could expect to see around the data engineering and data factory. They call themselves the data factory team now. And the gentleman who was presenting said, and we will see SSIS integrated into Fabric soon. And I chatted. I said, why? Why would we want to integrate SSIS? It's a legacy tool. And the answer was because it's shipped with SQL Server on-prem. Thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of Microsoft customers use SSIS every day. So they're going to support it. So give the people what they need.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think the answer to your question is yes. All right. What's the most effective path to becoming an analytics engineer? What's the path? Juan, this is brand new. This was one of the reasons that we were working on the objectives for a certification exam and identified that role. I will say that of the 4 exams that we discussed, that was the hardest one to put in a box. So today it's going to be a little bit of PL 300 Power BI for the analyst. It's going to be a little bit of DP 500, or DP 203, depending on the Microsoft tools that you choose to use. A little bit of data engineering, but it's going to be a little lighter. But 6 months from now, I might have a different answer for you. If they're going to support SSIS, why not also DTS? Oh yeah, thanks. All right, thanks, Matt.
Yeah,
just
yeah, that was a joke.
Right.
I learned DTS. Learned DTS, and of course I had to transition to SSIS whenever I had to upgrade my server a long time ago.
Yep.
So one role I didn't see here, but I think sometimes they mention, like data scientist, right? So do they?
Oh yeah.
Yes. So
there are a number of specialty roles that, if we were to kind of zoom out and look at a bigger Venn diagram, you would see the data scientist. There's an emerging need for professionals who specialize in stream analytics. I mean, this is outside of our topic tonight, but we're working with a number of clients who have interest in real-time streaming. I've actually built up a whole set of demos where I use this Raspberry Pi, and it has a sensor hat on it, and so every second or two it streams out the temperature, humidity, air pressure, et cetera, and some other sensor readings through an event hub into a Fabric event stream, and then we use Data Activator to look for patterns in those events and say, oh, well, the temperature went up above 40 degrees centigrade, then back down, then back up. That's a pattern. We're going to send a notification, maybe fire off a pipeline. There's a huge need for being able to process and react to data in real time. And sure, there will be an exam for that. If a consolidated data analyst for several years now starts to use DevOps, do they convert themselves to a data engineer? Or still has to know and use Python? Oh, good question, Fernando. There are so many possibilities here. I would say that notebooks are becoming the preferred way to craft data movement and transform data. Notebooks, and because a lot of the tooling in the industry has evolved out of Apache Spark, and Jupyter Notebooks are part of that story. Data scientists do that. There are streaming technologies that utilize Spark, Databricks, Snowflake, some of these other competing platforms, AWS, Redshift, and I'm not familiar with the whole AWS story, but I know that they have a whole streaming platform, utilize notebooks. And so I think that's an important skill. It's entirely possible to architect a solution at scale using data flows and ADF and to not ever use notebooks. But I think that notebooks are an important way to do that. And the most popular language used in notebooks today is a dialect of Python called PySpark. Thank you for the input on the skills. What I've heard is the movement to be performed programmatically in order to be called a data engineer. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Any opinions on Databricks, Unity Catalog versus Microsoft Fabric? Yeah, but I don't think we have time to go into it. Databricks Unity Catalog is a very, very deep and very feature-laden data cataloging tool. Microsoft does not have a tool that compares one-to-one with Unity Catalog. Purview is getting there. Purview is a lot of things, though, and part of what Purview does is that there's a data catalog, but it's also used for compliance and policies and assigning roles and permissions. It's a very broad tool. I think Databricks Unity Catalog is the standard to be compared with.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you bet, no. All right. Well, from this point on, I have some pretty ragged slides. So let me just jump into some demos. So I'm going to repeat at a pretty fast pace a set of demos that I have done in an earlier presentation about just working with a lot of data in Power BI. Bear with me just a second. And I'm bit. Oh, that's my recording. That is not what I wanted to show you. Bear with me. There we go. I had recorded a number of these demos, and I opened the folder that had the recordings in them. So I'm going to open each of these solutions up in Power BI Desktop. I'm going to move through them fairly quickly, and then we're going to graduate to Fabric. So I'm waiting for Desktop to open on another screen. And since I'm also waiting for OneDrive to download the files, I'm going to kind of open a few files ahead of time, which of course will slow down opening the first file, but we'll give it a minute. Fernando, there's a story behind that, and I guess we're waiting for that. So there's a story behind this. So I've had a trial since Fabric was released, and it used to count down from 60 days, and nobody at Microsoft can tell me why my Fabric trial keeps resetting. I thought it was because I was in the MVP program, but I reached out to the MVP program support the other day and said, "Hey, I noticed that my Fabric capacity is starting to tick down," and they said, "We didn't give that to you for free." So I don't know where I got it, but I got it. So I'm not complaining. It keeps resetting. And no, I don't pay for this one actually. All right, bear with me just a second as I sign into Power BI. As I get older, I'm reminded that I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. As I said, I had opened up 3 different Power BI projects. And there it is. Okay, I'm going to pull this down to this screen then. Okay, so some of you may have seen an earlier version of this presentation before. And by some of you, I mean you, Donald. All right, so if the goal is to manage a large volume of data, I want to be able to keep a small working set of data here on my desktop. So my largest table that I have in this sample model, the Fact Online Sales table, has 21 million rows. That's not a lot if we're thinking about enterprise scale, but for the purposes of a demo, it is a lot of data and it would take a long time to load that data. It would also make my PBIX file quite large. And we could talk about using the new Power BI project file format, which could help manage that scale. But just to keep the conversation simple, let's say that we want to keep our PBIX file small enough to where we could check it into a GitHub repo. We could keep it in OneDrive for Business, and we want to keep the file size well under, let's say, 100 megabytes. As you can see, I only have 1 million records loaded currently, and the way that I'm managing that is using a very simple set of filters based on parameters. So if we go up and take a look at my parameters, if you've had experience with the incremental refresh feature, this should be familiar to you. I have a range start parameter and a range end parameter. They're both date time parameters. And I'm going to go down to my Fact Online Sales table. Let's let the refresh hold on, organization account. It should just see my credentials since I just signed in, but looks like it's going to prompt me again. Okay, so that should authenticate. When I had originally created these demo reports, I connected to an Azure SQL instance. I've since moved that data into a Fabric Lakehouse. I'm using the SQL endpoint, which essentially tells Power BI that it's still SQL Server. As far as Power BI is concerned, I'm connecting to SQL Server, even though behind the scenes it's a Fabric Lakehouse. So you can see that I have loaded data from that table. You can also see that I'm using the new Power Query experience, which is in public preview. So you can actually see the M code here. And just to show that off a little bit, I can also turn on the diagram view, and you can actually see all of the queries in a different view and on a bigger monitor. This is actually pretty glorious. And you can see all of the steps here. And so this replaces the query steps you're used to seeing over on the right side in a more graphical kind of presentation view where you can see all of the query dependencies and parameters in this case. All right, but the point here is that for the Fact Online Sales table, I have a filter step, and that filter step uses my range start and range end parameters. And so I'm only loading 3 months worth of data, and that represents 1 million rows. That accomplishes the goal of keeping the PBIX file small, minimizing load time here on my desktop. I have enough data that I can play with. I can build some measures, build my visuals, test it, validate the results. Life is good. And because it's a fairly small file, this PBIX file would be about 30 megabytes in size. I can simply deploy that up to the service. And then up in the service, I can go change those parameters. And I can set them to, let's say, a range of 5 years and load it up with all 21 million rows of data in this fact table. So that accomplishes that goal. So let's close this file. And let's just kind of move up the complexity now. So I'm going to open a version of the same file that has incremental refresh enabled. So I'm waiting for the data to refresh in this. And oh, I was being prompted to sign in. I was looking at a different monitor. So let me do that again. All right, I'll bring that down to this monitor. Okay. So with that set of parameters now, that gives me the option to set up incremental refresh. So I can say, all right, let's turn incremental refresh on. And let's say that on this table, I want to automatically generate all of the partitions necessary to effectively and optimally manage the data refresh for this table. I'm going to say, all right, let's go back 5 years. And then let's say that for the most recent 2 months, I'm always going to refresh that data up to a full month and then a partial month. We'll say, yeah, let's only do complete months though. So we're always going to refresh 2 whole months and then a partial month. And then there are some advanced features here where I can say, you know what, if I'm within the current month, so currently within the month of June, every time a user interacts with a visual, I want to use direct query just to get the June data. And if a record just got inserted or updated at the data source, I'm going to see that record because I'm using direct query if we check that checkbox. I can also say I want to detect data changes. So go back and scan all of the data. And if anything over that period of 5 years has changed, go automatically figure that out and refresh those partitions. And I can apply this, and then I can deploy this model. And the first time it refreshes, it's going to take a while because it's going to populate all of those partitions. And then when I schedule a refresh, it's just going to magically figure out which partitions need to be processed. At the end of the month, it will fold the older month partition into the previous year. At the end of the year, it'll go create a new yearly partition. It'll roll off the 6th year, etc. It manages all of that automatically. And that's wonderful until I get to the point where I'm working with too much data. And we may need to think about managing all of this data transformation, the partitioning, and the storage upstream outside of Power BI. And that's where Fabric comes into the picture. So get back to the chat. Okay, there have been a few questions. Let me back up. Sean, I have 2 workspaces in different tenants. They both got down to about a week, then just, okay. Yeah, I know it's kind of funny the way that they're managing the trials and resetting them. If a demo runs flawlessly, then you may be cheating. Yeah, good point, Fernando. That's why all of the Microsoft product teams are now using recorded demos. Still a command line guy, especially with Git. Yeah, good for you, Donald. True professionals are. Is there any way is there any complete video on parameters to learn end to end, including loading country by country data? Aziz, I'm not sure if there is. There's a lot of good learning out there. Off the top of my head, I don't know of a learning resource to send you to. SQL BI comes to mind. There are the go-to resources that I will always lean toward, and SQL BI, the Italians, Marco and Alberto and Kurt now. I guess we can't call them the Italians anymore since Kurt joined their team. But they have a lot of good articles on some fairly advanced techniques. So I would be surprised if there aren't a few pretty meaty articles around parameterization from Marco or Alberto. And then Mike, in order for the incremental refresh to work correctly, are the requirements to have specific fields available in the underlying data? Yeah, there are, and it's a little bit of a head scratcher the way that they designed this. If we go back to Power Query, I have to have a date time type column to parameterize, even though time isn't part of the equation. When they architected this feature, and this was largely built by Christian Wade, who runs the engine team, he decided that, and I'm not blaming Christian, I'm just explaining what he explained to me when I asked him a few years ago, that in order to have as much flexibility as possible, they chose to use date time type parameters, and you have to have a date time corresponding column. So what I've done here is, if we look at the fact online sales table, so here's my date key. That's a date type column. I had to duplicate this column to create my partition key, which you can see that I've then created as a date time. I have seen cases where creating that column and changing the data type broke query folding. It didn't in this case. And I don't know if it's because Power Query had improved, or maybe I did something goofy before, but you have to pay attention to that. But this doesn't break query folding. So the filter is on this date time type column. And then you can see that the two partition parameters, when I say partition parameters, I mean my date range parameters are date time. So that is a requirement.
Got it. Yeah. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah. And I would say just go look up the Microsoft Learn article and follow it to a T. Just don't ask questions, just follow the directions. All right, so let's get into Fabric now. So I'm going to close down these files, and in the interest of time, we're going to zip ahead. So I'm going to take you to the workspace where I have essentially done all of my data shaping work using Fabric assets. And that might include a Gen 2 data flow. So let me open up this data flow so you can see what that looks like. It is like the rest of the designers in Fabric. It's a web-based tool. It's in your browser. There's nothing to install. I'm a little handicapped here in that I'm on a fairly low resolution 13-inch monitor, and this is a tool that wants a lot of real estate. But what you can see is that here within the browser window, I'm having pretty much the same experience as I did in Power BI Desktop. So I can go up and say, I want to see my query script. There's my M script. I'm going to turn that off because I just don't have enough screen real estate. And we'll collapse the query settings, and then I can turn on that diagram view. And diagram view. There we go. There's the diagram view. So, like I said, I'm a little handicapped in terms of screen real estate, but we even have this nice little thumbnail navigator over here. And it all works exactly the same in the browser as it does in desktop. So this is not Power BI. This is a Gen 2 data flow. The source is a lakehouse. So if I go up to home and to get data, I'm going to choose I'm sorry, it could be other sources. Again, my destination is going to be a lakehouse. My sources could be anything I want them to be. But this is the part that's magical when compared to Power BI Desktop, and that is that every query can have its own destination. So query by query, I'm going to set the destination. You can see I've set it to a lakehouse, but it could be a lakehouse, a warehouse, a KQL database, or an Azure SQL database. And so now we have the ability to get and transform and then load data into any of those destinations. So I'm going to load all of my data into the same lakehouse. Well, let's close this. Oops, my bad. All right, so here's my lakehouse. Now, while that's loading, what is a lakehouse? A lakehouse is a container in Fabric that is designed for data storage that is built on top of the Delta Parquet format. There are two different kinds of storage. We have unstructured storage, which in simple terms means a set of folders where I can store anything I want. Under the covers, it's Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage. You want to store image files, CSV files, Excel files, whatever you want. You can store Parquet files, but they're treated as files. And I can just create a hierarchy of folders here. I'm not using unstructured storage. That's why you don't see anything. Structured storage, which literally is a folder full of files, but they're Parquet files. And on top of each of these folders, which defines a table, there is a delta log that is used to stitch together all of the partitioned files, all of the individual Parquet files that are in the same schema that are created every time a record is inserted or updated. One of the magical things about Delta Parquet is that it preserves the state of your data in a slowly changing dimension type 2 kind of method, meaning that when a record is quote unquote updated, it literally just inserts a new record and marks the old one with an end date as of the insertion date of the new record in the new file. And so the delta log allows us to say, show me the state of the data as if it were 2 weeks ago at this specific date and time. And it works all the magic to go figure out what your data would have looked like. That's why we call it delta. So here's my lakehouse. And I'm going to go build a new semantic model on top of that lakehouse. Now, I will point out that every single storage object in Fabric automatically gets a semantic model created for it. I'm not a big fan of this feature. It exists so that we could just go build a Power BI report on any storage any storage item in Fabric. If I create a lake house to manage 3 tables while I'm staging and transforming them for whatever reason, there's a model built on top of that. It doesn't have any relationships. It doesn't have any measures. It's just a model that reflects the storage of that lake house. If I create a warehouse, I get a semantic model. If I create a KQL database for streaming data, I get a semantic model. I wouldn't recommend generally using these. I would go build an explicit semantic model like I'm doing here. Creating a model is a lot like your Power BI desktop experience. I'm just going to call this one test Austin. I'm going to select all of my tables, hit confirm. Again, it's nice to have a lot of screen real estate when you're doing modeling work. But as soon as that loads up all of these tables into the model, when you create a semantic model in Fabric, you are not using any storage space. It is a schema-only model definition because the data is already stored in Delta Parquet format within the lakehouse. And so the model is simply this metadata layer that we put on top of storage, and it's not pulling anything into memory at all. So I'm not going to go through the whole process of doing the modeling, but it's just like in desktop. You can drag and drop between your keys. You set the relationship directionality, follow the same rules and best practices that we've been doing in desktop. Single direction from the dimensions to the fact tables. You can hide and show things and rename things just like we've always done in desktop. And then I can add my measures here. I can create calculation groups. It's very much the experience that you're accustomed to in Power BI Desktop. All right, I'm going to do a cooking show demo on you now. We're going to switch to a finished model. So if I go down and I'm going to delete this one. All right, where did my model go? Right there. Okay. So I have this semantic model. I've created all of my measures. I've put them in display folders. It's all the same as you're accustomed to. I can go get the address of the workspace. I can open up Tabular Editor and connect to this, and I would be looking at a semantic model just like I would a Power BI model or a deployed data set or semantic model out on the Power BI service. It's going to be very much the same experience. So what's different? What is different is that this semantic model has no data in it because that data is here in the lakehouse. And because every table in this semantic model just simply sits on top of the Delta Parquet tables in structured storage in the lakehouse, the first user who touches the model, who drags and drops anything into a visual or opens up a Power BI report page, has to sit and wait a few seconds while the data is pulled up into memory. So there is a little bit of a cost in terms of performance. It's a few seconds. It's quick, but it's not instant. And then depending on what your capacity is and how much competition there is, that model is going to sit in memory within this service for X number of hours before it gets evicted to make room for other workloads that you may be working on. So that's the difference. There's some differences in kind of design experiences here, and that is that you cannot create a composite model on top of a direct lake model. You cannot add import mode tables or explicitly direct query tables on top of this model. All of that data needs to be pulled into the lakehouse. Now, you could use shortcuts in Fabric. And so if I have an Azure SQL database or another lakehouse or a warehouse, I could go create a shortcut to a table in one of those other data objects and then that table would be represented through this lakehouse and could be pulled into my model. So it's a different design experience. It's a different way to think about architecting a solution. But the point is that we're doing all of this work upstream, really adhering to Roach's maxim, doing all of the heavy lifting upstream and as little work downstream as necessary. Jack, what's your question?
It's kind of an architectural question. What's the best practice for once you land data in a lakehouse? At what point do you consider transforming that into a warehouse? And is that where you then should build your semantic model off the warehouse? Or as you just did, you're building your semantic model off of a lakehouse? And I'm not really sure the whys of each method.
And there isn't a strict answer in terms of under these conditions, always do it this way. But let me just kind of enumerate the differences and the trade-offs. A lake house is a fairly lightweight object in that it is the Spark engine sitting on top of Delta Parquet storage, and you manage it using Spark. If you need to add a column to a table, you're probably going to use PySpark to do that in a notebook. There isn't a SQL option because it's not a relational database. So you can use lakehouses very effectively for data at scale. They'll perform well, but you have to embrace Spark and know your way around notebooks in order to manage them. Now, if you're a SQL shop, you've been eating, sleeping, and breathing T-SQL, then that's what the warehouse is for. So the warehouse is sort of a lakehouse in that it uses Delta Parquet, and the Spark engine is utilized. It uses the Spark engine at its core, but sitting on top of the Spark engine is the SQL Server engine. It's actually the Microsoft MPP data warehouse engine. It's the same engine that's used in Azure Data Warehouse, but it sits on top of Spark. So there is another layer there, but there are internal optimizations that it applies to make queries go faster and to split them up across different nodes in a cluster, et cetera. The warehouse isn't necessarily faster than the lakehouse. It's just that you have the convenience of using SQL, and you can use both DDL and DML SQL. So you could create tables and alter tables, and you don't necessarily index it because it's self-tuning, but you can manage statistics and do a lot of kind of advanced DBA type things. So
if you landed in the warehouse, can you implement it with a composite model?
No, the rules are the same.
Okay.
The semantic model will behave exactly the same as a lakehouse. So, yeah,
so it sounds like it just comes down to comfort.
It does, and the skills of your team and what tools that you want to promote using going forward.
Thank you.
There's just real quick, Paul, there is a question in the chat from Lauren. I don't know if you want to take that now or if you want to do it a little bit.
Yeah, I saw that. So let me scan through it real quick. Yeah, so Lauren, the answer to your question is yes, that the warehouse is built on top of the SQL Server database engine. There's a long history there. A long, long time ago, a company called Data Allegra essentially got the SQL Server code base, and they built a product that was SQL Server scaled out across 60 different server nodes. And before the cloud became the way that we thought about managing large-scale data warehouses, they actually sold these appliances that were just racks and racks and racks of servers. And Microsoft then bought that back from them, and they started selling these server appliances, these data warehouse appliances for $4 million. You could buy a data warehouse appliance for Microsoft. And that's about when Azure evolved, and it became far more cost effective to use the cloud than go out and add a pallet full of servers to your data center. That's where the Fabric warehouse came from. It was ported from Azure Data Warehouse, but then they put it on top of Spark. That's a very, very long-winded way of saying, yes, you can script all of your database objects, create your tables, your relationships. You can build views, stored procedures, UDFs, etc. Now, interestingly, though, on a lakehouse, a number of those objects can be created, not relationships, but you can create views and UDFs. I don't think we support stored procs in a lakehouse, but yeah, it's far more SQL-like than a lakehouse.
And so that just real quick there, so that model, the semantic model, is that coming off of the lake house and therefore doesn't have those constraints available, or does the default semantic model come off of the data warehouse in Fabric?
So you define relationships in your semantic model, irregardless of whether there are relationships in the underlying storage. A warehouse can have relationship constraints. A lakehouse cannot.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
You bet. So additionally, on top of a lakehouse, we have a SQL endpoint that makes the lakehouse look like SQL Server. So any client that knows how to connect to SQL Server as of some version ago, 2012 perhaps, it will see this data as if it were SQL Server. So just to make that point, here's SSMS connected to my lakehouse, and here are all of the tables. And I can create views. All right. Then I build Power BI reports on top of my semantic model. And they really are thin reports, just as if you had gone and connected to a published data set. We say semantic model now, it means the same thing. But as far as desktop is concerned, as far as the Power BI visualization experience is concerned, there's really no difference between a direct lake semantic model and a published Power BI semantic model. It was created in desktop, other than the way it behaves behind the scenes. That leaves us with one more topic, and that is, what happens if my direct lake model uses too much memory? So I need to go look up this article very quickly. Let me go find what I'm looking for. Microsoft Fabric Direct Lake Guardrails. All right, let me see if I've got the right article. Yes. So when we think of Fabric, because the storage capabilities are so vast, we can literally store, hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes, even terabytes of data in a single lake house. Now, you pay for that. And so based on your capacity, storage is cheap, and generally speaking, the storage limitations are much, much higher than we're accustomed to. So it's not a question of storage, but it may be a question of memory and CPU and just overall compute resources. There are certain guardrails in place, and those guardrails are used to make sure that you don't fill up your capacity. And it looks like this. If I have an F64, which is the typical starting point for an enterprise class Fabric solution, within a semantic model table, I can have up to 5,000 Parquet files. Typically takes a long time to break a table down into 5,000 files. But if I hit that limit, and I go query enough data out of that single table to need to read from 5,000 Parquet files, that semantic model will fall back to direct query mode. It will switch from using the Delta Parquet or the VertiParquet method, reading data out of memory, to using the SQL endpoint over the lakehouse, which is going to be considerably slower. And there's no message box that pops up that says, hey, you just exceeded this limitation. Your user will just notice that it gets slower. There are some other constraints here. So let's move down and let's say that we're developing using an F2 or an F4. So now we're down to 1,000 Parquet files per table. We're up to 300 million rows per table. So, you could have a large fact table that exceeded that. The maximum model within storage in terms of gigabytes, yeah, we can hit 10 gig pretty easily, and we could exceed 3 gigabytes of memory. So that's the guardrail for that capacity. When you hit it, it just slows down, unless you turn on a fairly new feature. I have way too many browser windows open, so I may not be able to find this quickly. So there is a feature within the model that you can set in desktop. We now have the ability in preview to connect Power BI desktop to a published Direct Lake semantic model. Excuse me. And you can turn off the automatic direct query fallback feature. And when you do that, and this is generally meant for testing, it'll just break. It'll just stop working, and you'll get an error. And if you go look at the logs, it'll say you hit the guardrail limit, and it fell out of direct lake mode. Excuse me. All right. Any questions at all about that?
There is a question from Bill. It's about something else. It's around Fabric capacity and premium capacity.
Okay. Well, let me go back to my slides. Like I said, my the slide deck is still a work in progress. So let me just finish up the slide deck here, and then we can just take some general questions. Let me display that slide. So, how should we think about transitioning existing Power BI solutions? I think the first thing before we get into this is you don't have to make any changes. Import mode is still supported. We can still use desktop in the same way that you've been using it to build your Power BI solutions. You can deploy them to any workspace, whether or not you have a Fabric capacity, under standard Power BI licensing, Pro license, PPU license, or Fabric capacity licensing. So you don't have to change anything. If you do want to use and take advantage of Direct Lake mode and start thinking more enterprise scale and push a lot of this work upstream into the data engineering components, then you need to establish that model schema in a lakehouse. So the way that you structure your tables, the way that you name your objects, is going to be done in a lakehouse or a warehouse. And again, I would generally default to a lakehouse. Sorry, I have a tickle in my throat. The pollen count was very, very high today, and I think I'm just having an allergic reaction. Some things to keep in mind, and I'll build a slide on this as well, is that Delta Parquet doesn't let you use friendly column names. You can't have spaces in column names. There are some data type limitations to be aware of, and so follow those guidelines. Generally speaking, if you want to rename objects using friendly sentence case, you will need to do that within the semantic model and not within the lakehouse. So that's going to be a little bit of a design experience and something some of our Power BI people are not thrilled about, but it's kind of the way it works. Move the Power Query queries from desktop to Gen 2 data flows. I will say that though data flows are pretty far along, it is a new feature within Fabric. There is some brokenness in there to be aware of. They're not major things. I'm aware of a couple of gotchas, such as guest users will not be able to browse objects within the local tenant. So if your users are coming in as guest users, there's currently a bug, and the product team is working on that bug, where it will end up browsing their own tenant based on their credentials rather than the tenant that they've signed into. That's a little bit of a showstopper for us, because we actually have a sandbox tenant that we use within our organizations, and we've opened a support case. But with that exception, I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing in Gen 2 data flows. For each query, you set the destination to a new table or lakehouse. That's how you populate the lakehouse. Generate the new semantic model from the lakehouse. Don't use the default semantic models. It's a feature I wish we could turn off and just hide. There is a reason for it, but it's not for building rich Power BI solutions. Rename your tables and columns in the semantic model using user-friendly names, just like we've always done, but you have to do it in the model, not in the lakehouse. And create all of your objects like measures, hierarchies, display folders, perspectives, calculation groups in the model, again, just like you would in desktop. You can do a lot of this work in desktop now, connected to a semantic model, and then you build your reports on top of that model. So it's fairly straightforward as far as the design experience goes. I think that might be the gist of everything that I have. Yeah, I just have some things to share with you here. We wrote a white paper at 3Cloud. It's not just marketing fluff. It's a good paper with some guidance around getting ready for Fabric and getting started with Fabric. This deck is really rough, so I'm not going to offer to share it with you since it's not complete. I would simply search for the 3Cloud white paper under this title, and it should be fairly easy to find. Getting started with Fabric, or how to activate Microsoft Fabric in your organization. That'll be in the finished deck whenever I get that done. And I would also take a very close look at the Fabric adoption roadmap within Microsoft Learn. This is an exercise that I go through with every single customer when they're looking at Fabric and we're getting ready to start engaging with them. I walk them through all 12 points of the Fabric adoption and maturity framework, and we rate their maturity. You can rate it on a scale of 100 to 500, do some math and kind of figure out where there's room to grow and where you may be more mature. But data governance, maturity, adoption, these are all very, very important things to discuss outside the technical elements of building solutions. And that is it for the PowerPoint deck. So let's get to the remaining questions. So Bill, I'm just going to read your question. Interested in switching to Fabric. My company has 30 Power BI premium per user licenses, trying to figure out how much reserved capacity I need to buy. Went into the Fabric admin portal, looked at the capacity settings. Okay, a lot of people are struggling with this very question. It's hard to compare what you have now. There is no comparison to PPU. There isn't a per user flavor of Fabric today. So to your question, would an F2 license be good enough? My answer is try it. You can always upgrade. The nice thing about the way that they have created the SKUs in Fabric is one, you don't have to use reserved. It'll cost you more to go month to month, but try it for 2 months. Just paying month to month. And if the F2 doesn't work for your POC, then move it up to F4 and then look at converting to reserved capacity after that. Reserved for everyone, that means that you're buying a year's worth and then you get a discounted price. You can also pause a capacity and save money that way as well. So yeah, that's a big it depends. It's really hard to say this is exactly what you need until we get more experience. It's hard for us to do that. Yeah, okay. And Lauren, I think you just said the same thing that I said. All right, other questions?
Yep, feel free to come off mute or raise your hands either way if anybody has anything else they want to ask Paul. Now's the time.
Andrew.
Hey, Monish has a question, but he's a bit too scared to ask this one, so I'll ask it for him.
All right.
Our current architecture is based on on-prem, where we have unlimited storage and compute. So we have simpler processes like full refresh for everything, just to make it simple, to make those pipelines simple. Moving forward to a cloud-based solution, do we need to re-architect our system so we don't run over a smaller SKU? Because we now need to start paying for all of that compute.
I think the answer ultimately is yes. Nothing is free and nothing is unlimited. Yes, you've already purchased storage and you've already purchased servers.
Correct.
So now that you've purchased them, you have a finite amount of storage and compute power available to you, and you're working within that, and that's great. A couple of years ago, we had a client in a very similar situation, and they had built an analysis services tabular model that they referred to as their cube, and that tells you how long they'd been using analysis services. And it was 800 gigabytes in size. And this was before Fabric, but they wanted to move to the Power BI service in the cloud. And they said, so what's it going to take for us to lift and shift our 800 gigabyte tabular model into Power BI Premium? And we said, well, why don't we look at how we can re-architect to build a more efficient model? And they pushed back and they said, no, we really don't want to do that. We want to know what it's going to cost. So we did the math. We figured out, well, if we could reduce it down to, let's say, 400 gigabytes, that would be it was a P5 teetering on a P6. That was $80,000 a month to lift and shift a single semantic model. Now, I will tell you that this was a very large insurance company, and their answer was, okay, who do we write the check to? Yeah. And so, you really have to back up the bus a little bit and think about, strategically, where do we need to be? What's cost effective now and what's going to be cost effective a year or 2 years or 5 years from now. I think incremental loading is a well-established pattern. It's not that hard to do anymore, and I think it's just a good goal. There's a reason that we use best practice patterns, and that it's it's a way to form habits, and those habits will be repeated in later projects. Just because we have the luxury of doing things inefficiently today doesn't necessarily mean that we should do them inefficiently in the future. So, I mean, yeah, that's my simple answer is yeah, I would back up the bus. Start with a small POC. Get your hands around a few tables and in a fairly small scale project. But definitely follow well-established patterns. One thing that I will point out, let me just show you a brand new feature in Fabric that I'm kind of excited about. And I need to go find the right browser window, so bear with me. So we are now kind of entering a phase with Fabric, and I'm not in Microsoft marketing, so I can say nasty things about the way that Microsoft does things. Fabric was built on top of the Power BI service, and the Power BI service was never architected with this kind of scale and complexity in mind. And so it was very much a retrofit. Now it works, and it works very, very well. But when you think about an enterprise scale, managing hundreds of projects in medallion architecture with DevOps and all of the pipelines and the deployment stages and managing dev and QA and production, it can get crazy. And to try to shoehorn all of that into a service with workspaces was a pretty big undertaking. So the product teams are scrambling to, one, make folders work completely within the service, to be able to give us role-based security and access at various levels within lakehouses, and a number of other features that let this thing work at scale and to be able to architect at scale. And this is a feature that definitely does that. So when you create a workspace now, you can start with an architecture template that's called a task flow. And you can pick from a number, you can create your own, you can customize them. But let's say that I want to establish a medallion architecture, which is a fairly standard way to think about architecting a lake house. 3 layers, bronze, silver, gold. I land my raw data in bronze. I get it ready. We used to call that staging, but the thinking is a little bit different now. Silver means semi-curated. Gold means ready for reporting. And I can just select one of these architectures and I get this task flow. And then for each of the items in the task flow, I can say, all right, well, what is my bronze layer? Well, that's going to be a lake house. It could be a collection of lake houses. So I can go create an item and say, all right, I'm going to go create a lake house. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to assign it to this thing. I'm going to rename this thing. You could attach it to an existing object. But we use a tool called Lucid Chart to do our architectural designing. It's a lot like Miro. What's cool is that this is like Lucid, where I get to draw pictures and connect things and be able to get feedback and show them to stakeholders. And then I can say, make it so, and it turns into a collection of assets that I can use. So that was kind of a long-winded way of saying there are well-established patterns, and I would strongly recommend following them so that you're in line with the way that the industry is thinking. Donald, what was your question or comment?
Oh, I almost forgot now. I think I remember when Fabric first got announced, you wrote a blog post about like, well, what does this mean for Power BI? And you were sort of like, it doesn't necessarily mean anything if you're happy with your situation. I guess what's the part about Fabric that excites you the most, or that you see, being a difference from what you could do with Power BI before? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What am I most excited about? I mean, they're all of the fairly obvious things, being able to, build solutions at scale and manage large volumes of data, all the stuff that we've been trying to promote within the enterprise space.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's exciting to me is that as I've watched the Power BI story grow, at first, under the leadership of James Phillips, when Power BI grew out of a bunch of cobbled together Excel components into Power BI desktop, their number one goal was to compete with Tableau. And, desktop, small scale, everything was just about kind of getting the job done and not about enforcing best practices and doing things the right way. And that's been my mantra for a long time. You've read my blog posts about doing Power BI the right way. So I feel like I've been kind of swimming against the current, saying, no, you need to you have to use surrogate keys and you have to rename things. And finally the pendulum has swung in that direction. And that's the focus now. And that's what I'm excited about, is like, you know what, the Dynamics people, the Office people, they've got BI now. Let them do things their way. Now's our chance to get back to building enterprise solutions.
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, you bet.
I think there's maybe one more question for you, Paul. It's a follow-up question from Bill about the Fabric license. If I try Fabric, can I switch back to premium per user without hassle? Would I have to change much?
I have no idea. I would think so. I mean, you can still buy PPU, and you can once you sign up for a capacity, you can stop paying for it. So I think so, but I'm not a licensing expert.
Yep. And Lauren, I think you got your answer from Donald in the chat around the.
I did.
time
and
travel?
That
Yeah,
was
okay.
that was a great reference. Thanks, Donald.
Okay. Any
So
others? Yeah.
I will say that I appreciate you kind of bearing with my, presenting on a new topic, put in a presentation that is not fully baked. I'm kind of cobbling it together, but it's also something I'm very passionate about. So I appreciate, you tolerating the stops and the starts and the randomness of this, but as this continues to come together, I always post my presentations to my blog after I've presented a completed deck. So I would just say, go out to my blog and watch for it. SQL Server BI blog. Either SQL Server BI.blog or SQL Server BI.blog.com. And my presentations will be here. So hopefully they'll pick this for the European FabCon in September, and we'll get the deck up there from that presentation.
That's cool. Yeah, and I did put the link. We put the links to your blog out here in the chat as well, Paul. Just so you know.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Awesome. Great job. I know you think it's cobbled together, but it was still a great presentation. So thank you very much for that. It's always
Thank you.
education.
All right. Oh, and OregonSQL.org. We do our presentations over Teams as well. So you're welcome to join our user group.
Yes, but did your checkbook go?
That's great. We'll look for that.
All
I'll
right.
look up that link and drop it in there.
All
Thanks
right.
a bunch.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Good night.
All right. So for those that are left, I know we've got a few people left. We'll go ahead and jump to the next thing here. Now I did, so this is going to take us back to our drawing. So let me share my screen again. And we'll take a look here. Yep. Okay. All right, so this is where we talk about our drawings for Enterprise DNA and Radicad. So let me pull that over here and go full screen. Okay, so we'll do 2 drawings for Enterprise DNA and then 1 for Radicad. So Enterprise DNA, this is, it's been out there for a long time. Most people here might know about it. Some might be new to this, but this is an online learning portal where they have a lot of content around Power BI, around other things within the Power Platform. So you'll find things like for Power Automate, Power Apps. They also have things around Python, SQL. They're starting to spin up content for Fabric as well. So really good place to go out and learn, these things that we've talked about tonight and other things as well. There's some other tools out there that you can take advantage of, like to store your code and things like that. So a lot of good resources. The way this particular membership works or subscription is that it's good for 1 year. So if you win, you basically get the subscription for a year and then it expires. So that's the terms and condition are up to the Enterprise DNA team. And so they're the ones that kind of make those things. So after a year, that would essentially, your subscription would be turned off. So they would manage that. So that's Enterprise DNA. So we'll do that first. We'll do 2 drawings for that. So Matt and Sajad, I created this list as I was trying to listen to Paul's presentation. So I'm going to need your help to see if this looks right for the Enterprise DNA drawing. So that's here. And then I've got my Radicad. So some people may have fallen out. So if you could just help spot check this real quick, I really appreciate it.
Certainly. All right. So I see A there. I see Andrew Puri. I'm not seeing. Okay, Aziz is not here. Oh wait, no, Aziz. I don't see. Oh wait, I see it at the bottom of the list. Never mind. Okay. And I do no longer see Bill Krolicki.
Okay. Okay.
Schwang is still here. Fang. Okay, Daniel. I do not see Daniel anymore.
Okay.
Do not see Donald Parrish.
Okay.
I do not see Eddie, CEJB. No Jeff Moten. No Jack Irby. I do not see Juan Ross Orez, and also no Juan Aguirre.
Okay.
Lauren is definitely still here. Mass C is still here. Monish is not here. Nick, I do not see. Norma is still here, so that is good. Victoria, gone. And we just talked about Aziz still here. All right, so I think that's
Okay,
your
that's our
list.
list. Okay, that's our list. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so I want to see if I can do it. So I've got
Yeah.
our trusty Wheel of Fortune here.
Cool. And when he pulls up the list here, look here, and as soon as he copies it in, and verify that you are, your name is there. So if you do not see your name, you have 0 chance of winning. So make sure, speak up if your name is, if you're here and your name is not there.
Right.
All right, going once, going twice. Go on, take it away.
All right, here we go.
Oh,
Okay.
Aziz, did you have a question? I see your hand
Hi,
raised.
yes, I can. Yeah. I cannot enter the chat now. I only, leave the chat room.
Okay. All right. Don't know if I caught the whole thing, but anyway, Mac C, it looks like you are our first winner of Enterprise DNA. So if you could, to confirm it, we do need first and last name, and then also an email address so we can get the information to you. So if
Sounds
you could put
good.
that
Thank you.
put it in the chat, and that makes you an official winner as soon as we see that. Okay.
All right, so we'll do that one more time then for the second subscription. Looks like Lauren got that one. Congrats,
All
Lauren.
right. Yes, very good. All right. Obviously,
Okay.
Lauren, I believe I have your last name, but I do need an email address.
Absolutely. That's really great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Enterprise DNA is phenomenal, right?
Mhm.
Radicate is pretty cool too, but Enterprise DNA with a year's worth of stuff and the amount of content they have out there now, our slides are like older.
Yeah.
You will find so much more out there. So
Yeah.
very cool site. You can't argue with Radicat either, it just so. And
Right.
and I see thank you, Mac. I do have your information. So Lauren, just need yours, and that will close out Enterprise DNA. So
Yep. So the next one is the Radicat drawing. So this is good to get access to the Radicat Academy, which is run by, it's not run by, but it's kind of owned by Reza Rad. And there's a lot of good resources out there as well. I mean, if you know Radicat or Reza, he's always producing content around Power BI and Fabric and other things. So the way this particular one works, it's good for 1 month subscription. So that's basically like a $50 value. So that's the way that one works. This is good for 1 month free subscription to the Radicat Academy. All right, so let's jump back.
Matt, how
here.
can I get that email to you?
Can you put it in the chat? If you can put it into the
chat, if that's fine, that would be best.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't want that shared with everybody. You can, as soon as I'll tell you when I have it, and then you can delete it if you so desire from the chat.
It's fine. It's but I'm in all the Power BI blog chats with.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I have it, Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you,
I've
guys.
copied it. And you should, both you and Mac, you should receive those emails tonight, both from Enterprise DNA and from me. So I log them as soon as it's done. But anyway, back to you, Mike.
Yeah. So this is our list for Radicads. I think these are the same folks that we've got. So we'll spin again and we'll see who wins. Okay, Permano Pomono. If you're with us, you just gotta drop in your email address for us, so I can send over the details to the Radicat team.
I'm not seeing a.
Not there?
I do not see a Pomono in
Okay.
there.
Then let's take them out and do it again.
Okay.
Lauren, I think you got this one too.
Big winner.
Yep.
Congratulations. You have
winner
lots
tonight.
of learning. Obviously, I
You're gonna
still
be
have your information.
Yeah, you're going to be
Yes.
smarter
Oh my
than all of
goodness.
us.
I would love to share that
Yep.
with anybody as well.
All right, we could
If
take
there's,
your name out and spin it again if
I
that's
didn't
what you.
realize winning twice. Yeah, no, I'd love to spread the. I actually already have a Radicat subscription going.
Oh, you do? Okay.
All right, well then, remove the
enough.
name and let's spin again.
Okay, let's do it one more time.
Yeah,
There we go.
the odds are ever in people's favor. So,
Yeah, it's getting better and better.
yeah. All right, checking this one. All right, Chuang Nguyen, are you still there? All right, cool. All righty, and I have the information, Chuang. So that is a Radicat winner. Congratulations.
All right, congrats. Congrats to both of you for winning. All right, so with that, that's basically a wrap for us this month. We've got speakers lined up for next month. So Tim is going to be talking about integration in Power BI with Power Automate and Power Apps. So come back for that. And I'll be rolling out. We've got other speakers kind of lined up for this year as well. So look out for invitations to attend those as well. So thanks for everyone attending tonight, and we'll see you next month. Take care.
Great job. Thank you.